against the intentions of those who produced it. So there is a technique which implies the possibility of reading between the lines. However, I was lucky enough to discover by chance, maybe we are going to talk about chance later on.
We're going to talk a lot about chance.
Okay. I discovered it by chance, but it was a kind of a planned chance to discover in the archive a trial in which there was a deep gap between the Inquisition's assumptions and the defendant answers. I discovered this in the State Archive of Venice. It was in 1963, I think, and I came across a document, 4 pages document, in which an inquisitor asked questions to a young coward, a peasant from a little town in Friuli, on the eastern border of Italy, in 1593, I think. And so he said, the inquisitor said, "Are you a benandante?" I'd never heard this word before, and I assumed that even the inquisitor had never heard this word before. So the literal meaning of the word was clear in Italian: somebody who goes for the good, but the answer was completely unexpected. Because after some attempt to evade the question, the young man said, "Yes, I am a benandante. Since I was born in a caul, meaning wrapped in the amniotic sac, my spirit leaves my body 4 times a year, and we, the benandanti, fight in spirit against the witches for the fertility of the crops. We, the benandanti, use as weapons fennel branches. The witches use sorghum sticks." I read this, and I was so much overwhelmed by what I read that I left the archive and I started to walk. I mean, I was in Venice. The archive is one of the most wonderful places in the world, close to a church, Santa Maria dei Frari, in which you have a wonderful painting by Titian, two of them, both of them wonderful painting by Giovanni Bellini. And I was walking back and forth, and I still remember smoking cigarettes, something which I stopped later on. But this detail gives me the distance. I mean, myself, but also a different kind of being who had been affected by that discovery, which luckily enough, after a while, led me to Udine, and I discovered 50 trials against benandanti, men and women, some of them very long, full of details, and this was the topic of my first book, The Night Battles. In that case, the dialogic dimension was evident, not only at a literal level, meaning questions and answers, but also the gap between, let's say, the inquisitor and the benandanti, and then the clash between the two worldviews, their respective worldviews.
Just one thought, because you mentioned witchcraft.
Yeah.
And before we start digging into the archive, which we hope to do very soon, there's something you said the other morning at the Siegel School of Publishing, the masterclass, which was that all the writing about witchcraft, the shamanism, and the magic, and what stayed with me was that you don't believe in magic, but the act of excitement over those who do believe in magic. Would you speak a little bit about this briefly?
Yes. Okay. I decided to become a historian in Pisa because I was there as a teacher, as a professor some years ago before my retirement, but I was there a long time ago as a student. And so I was there in the library and I suddenly made a triple decision. tried to become a historian, deciding to work on witchcraft trials and trying to rescue the voices and the attitudes of men and women accused of being witches. Actually, the third decision implied a lot of problems which I was completely unaware of at that moment. And actually, because it meant to work on the archives of repression in order to rescue the voices of the persecuted. So I think that my interest in methodology, in historical methodology, was in some way elicited, but from that kind of paradoxical use of the evidence against the intentions of those who produced it. Although possibly my interest in methodology would have emerged anyway. In any case, as I said, as you said, you recall this, I don't believe in the power of magic, but retrospectively, I realized that 3 books pushed me to choose that topic as a topic of research. Books, yes, texts, let's say. One of them was Carlo Levi's Christ Stopped at Eboli. And in a way, I think that Carlo Levi's experience in a small village of southern Italy was sent to internal exile by the fascist regime in the 30s. And Carlo Levi and my father had been friends. They were both involved in the same underground anti-fascist movement. I have recollections of Carlo Levi in my childhood. Then I met him again. I was really struck by his book because he was looking at the attitudes, the culture of those southern Italian peasants from a distance. He was a man of the Enlightenment in a sense, but also in a sort of, with deep interest and participation, emotional participation. That kind of split, distance and attempt to closeness is something which struck me deeply. And I think is still affecting my work as a historian. Then there was a work by an Italian anthropologist, the most important Italian anthropologist so far, Ernesto De Martino, Il Mondo Magico, the World of Magic. I realized later, much later, that there is a dreadful English translation of this book with passages which have been suppressed, other passages which have been added, really dreadful. Maybe there is a better translation, I didn't check. But I read this book in Italian, of course. And when I came across that document about the Bellandante Benichino dalla Tisana, I suddenly thought about Siberian shamans, but I did not realize why. I became aware of the connection only of the, let's say, what pushed me towards that flash of mind much later, because I realized that De Martino started his work with a 2 pages long quotation from a book by Sergei Shirokogorov, a Russian ethnographer who wrote a classic book on shamanism, The Psychomental Complex of the Tungus, a book published in English, his wife was English, in 1935. But here I must add something, which is a sort of look like a digression, an anecdote, which is related to my maternal grandfather. His name was Giuseppe Levi. He was a biologist, and he taught biology in many Italian universities until 1938, when being Jewish, he was ejected from Italian universities, taught a few years in Liège. He was a powerful figure. 3 of his pupils got a Nobel Prize, something really unusual. And I was deeply influenced in my childhood by his relationship to science. The first, and I must say the only time I looked at a microscope was in his laboratorio, in the place in which he was doing research. He asked me to have a look at it. Actually, I saw something yellow. I was deeply disappointed, but I didn't dare to say that I was so disappointed. But actually, microscope became much later a metaphor for microhistory. This had for me a deep resonance. But what about the anecdote? My grandfather, Giuseppe Levi, was a great mountain climber. And in his youth, he came to India, went to Himalaya, and then he went to Caucasus. So I heard those stories. And when I was an adolescent, he told me something which left me wordless. He told me that in India, I don't know where, he saw a fakir, and the fakir made this gesture, and a tree came out from the ground. I was speechless because I was unable to believe this, but I was speechless also, and maybe above all, because my grandfather, a real positivist, was saying me this. They say, but how is this possible? And they say, and I realized later that this was real positivism, because he saw this, and he was, there was a question, but he had no answer. So this was real science. He had no answer. I am still with this kind of split. There are questions, real questions, but sometimes we have no answer. I don't know whether I answered your question.
Absolutely, totally, thank you, and well beyond. There was something else that I wanted to talk to you about, which was again to do with archives. But you have to be patient about this because I have a little text. Probe. Memory that one digs around, carefully isolating the fact from its shadow. Fiction? Or is it the other way around? Often the impressions that flit at rapid miss and blink speed during the process of digging result in a memorizing that is intuitive and necessary. All of this could take a lifetime of deduction. The apparent dailiness of facts as they reveal themselves may appear to be ordinary, but the ordinary adds up and often results in an exemplary gathering of multiple layers of fact, or fictionalized fact disguised as someone else's truth. Over very long time spans and under so many different skies, spread over centuries, and yet some things don't appear to change, almost remain unpolished and in a state best described as raw. Like feelings that appear of lesser consequence and yet seem to occupy our interest, beyond the emotions that feelings inspire, what is often restored by way of thought becomes visibly stronger than all that is long forgotten, unremembered, as in deliberately erased from memory. It's a race. The writing of what I need to say before it erases itself from my mind, accelerating the forgetting even as I write. There's a no man's land between remembrance and its opposite, forgetting. I urge you to talk to us about the historian as a living archive, the complexity of personal ethics while sifting through evidence without falling prey to bias or prejudice or the injustice of the times we live in.
So, you are provoking me on different grounds. So, history and fiction, the historian as a living archive. I would like to give you a kind of tortuous answer, starting from the archive as, at a literal level, not as a metaphor. In my previous answer, I said I was pushed by 3 authors, and I mentioned Carlo Levi, Ernesto De Martino, but I didn't mention yet the 3rd author, Antonio Gramsci. I was affected like, a lot of people in my generation and later, by Antonio Gramsci's books, writings, meaning, first of all, his prison notebooks. And actually, I started to work on witchcraft starting from sort of naive, what retrospectively seems to me a naive hypothesis, meaning witchcraft as a crude form of class struggle. This was in 1959. It makes sense retrospectively. In any case, I started working on inquisitorial records with this kind of hypothesis in my mind. And I came across a trial which has been the topic of my first published essay on a trial, which is on a trial, a witchcraft trial, which took place in Modena, in northern Italy, in 1519, against a peasant woman, Chiara Signorini, and she was accused to having put a charm against her landlady, who had ejected her from the land. So, in a sense, I was confronted with a document which supported my hypothesis. I was deeply disappointed. I thought that the hypothesis was not so interesting if it was possible to find such an easy support for it. Actually, at the end of my essay, which had a different title, Witchcraft and Popular Piety. Why? Because that peasant woman, Chiara Signorini, when the inquisitor asked her, so did you put a charm against your landlady? She said, yes. The Virgin Mary told me this, the Virgin Mary. And then she started to describe the Virgin Mary who appeared to her, a young, robust young lady. And the inquisitor began to say, but was she a woman? Was not she black? And then after a series of questions, of imposing questions, later there was also torture, Chiara Signorini confessed that she met the devil, and the devil asked her to put a charm against her landlady. I was impressed by the clash between the two worldviews, the imposition of the inquisitor's worldview, also by the fact that the peasant resisted on one point, meaning she said, notwithstanding the inquisitor's insistence, no, I never attended the witch's Sabbath. But in any case, I started again my research with the feeling that my initial hypothesis did not work. So I had no hypothesis in a sense. And I decided to begin a sort of archival tour of Italy, looking for inquisitorial trials. So the first destination was Venice, because in the State Archive of Venice, there is a huge amount of inquisitorial trials. So, since I had no clues, I started looking at a 19th century, late 19th century inventory in which every trial had a kind of one-line resume. Magic, heresy, but I mean, very, very laconic resume. And then the date, the name of the defendants. So, since every scholar was allowed to ask for, I think, 3 or 4 volumes each day, I was in Venice, and in the morning I went to the archive and I started to play something which I retrospectively called Venetian roulette. So I entered the archive and said 4, 34, 45, 67. And then I started looking at them. And in this way, I came across Menichino's trial. I mean, the Benandanti trial. So it was chance, but planned chance to a certain extent. I mean, I've been playing this game with different kind of evidence. For instance, with electronic catalogs. So, I mean, asking a word and then looking at the results and then walking in the dark. So it's a combination of chance and prejudice, I would say, and bias. I think that this is something which is at the very core